Welcome to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Prior to 1890, if the name Okanagan was recognized at all, it was as someplace in the wilderness. But what happened between 1890 and 1900 that attracted the attention of British investors to this region? The answer, Ishbel Maria Gordon, the Countess of Aberdeen, whose coat of arms motto is "Advance with Courage." Her story today on Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with you, along with Ursula Surtees. She is the curator of the Kelowna Museum and has a real great fondness for Lady Aberdeen. But let's go back to when she was just a baby. Where was she born?
She was born in Scotland, in Inverness, and she was the daughter of Lord Tweedmouth, and her name was Ishbel Maria Marshbanks. She grew up a rather lonesome girl, but I think that she had a lot of internal thinking going on, and I think it influenced her later on in life.
She had a very well-developed social conscience. You wouldn't normally have found this with people from royalty or from the privileged class, do you think?
Well, there seems to be a bit of a split. Some of them sort of just took the money and had a ball. Others took a really long look and felt that there were some responsibilities attached to it. And Ishbel was one of these people. She grew up seeing poverty around her as well as wealth, because she spent a lot of time in Scotland. She realized that she was fortunate. And I think that the more she thought about it, the more she felt that even though at this time in her life she wasn't able to do too much, that this was an ultimate goal.
Right. Now, she, of course, when you get married as a vice-regal, there are other reasons besides true love that are the reasons for it. But when did she meet the man who was to become the Governor-General of Canada, Lord Aberdeen?
Well, his name was John Gordon. And when she first saw him, she sort of saw him from afar, and she didn't think her chances were very good. She fell totally and completely in love, and he seemed to be sort of ignoring her somewhat, and she was very desperate. She wrote in her diary many times about her, you know, she'd seen John, and she didn't know whether this is ever going to work out. But anyway, unbeknownst to her, John also was very interested and went to father and asked for Ishbel's hand in marriage. They did marry. It was a love match, and they enjoyed a very happy and long married life.
And really worked so closely together.
They did.
So now this person, the reason we're interested, of course, in Lady Aberdeen is because, Lord and Lady Aberdeen, is because they discovered the Okanagan.
Well, they did. They'd had quite a stressful time with social and political offices in London, and so they decided they'd go away for a year, and they decided they'd go to a place where nobody knew them and that they hadn't seen. So they decided to come to Canada, and this they did, and they made their way across to Banff. While they were in Banff, they heard about the Okanagan, and I'm not too sure how they facilitated it, but they got to the Okanagan and totally and completely fell in love with it. At that time, the only thing that was happening in the Okanagan was the running of cattle. Yeah. It was definitely cow country. And Lady Aberdeen had seen a few of the trees that were growing and producing some quite phenomenal fruit. And so the thought came to her that in this wonderful valley, in this very healthy climate, would be a wonderful place to make a start on this sort of rehabilitation of various people.
Sounds like a great idea. Perfect place to stop, because when we come back, we're going to take a look at their first visit to the Okanagan and Lord Aberdeen's being named to be Governor-General of Canada, and how they got involved in the Okanagan and how the Okanagan became world-renowned as a result of them, right after this break. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Ursula Surtees, your curator of the Kelowna Museum. We're talking about Lady Aberdeen. When she came out in 1890 for this rest trip, it turned out she was a wonderful chronicler. She was an artist, and she was a photographer.
Yes, she was. She used the Kodak camera, and she even called her book Through Canada with the Kodak. And when it was too dark, no flash bulbs, then she sketched.
For example, look at this sketch of that. This looks like Kalamalka Lake, but she would, of course, know it as Long Lake.
That's right. She always referred to it as Long Lake.
Well, this is just she is a wonderful artist, too. I mean, this is not just scratchings.
No, she was very talented, and she caught the atmosphere of so many places.
That's right. The Kelowna. Now, this is Kelowna of that era, and you can actually see Poplar Point, Manhattan Point, and the point which is now City Park.
That's right. And all of that she caught, again, totally different from the other ones that she did of Arrow Lakes or Quebec. Each one she caught the atmosphere of. Very talented.
So out they come to the Okanagan, 1890, to get away from it all and discover a place that is just lovely enough for her to want to put down roots somehow.
Well, this is true, and in her diary, she wrote that summer, she and her children always looked upon it as a summer of sunshine and butterflies. And they decided that they would like to buy property here because they could see the potential for the fruit growing. And so they did. They bought the Gooshigan, and then they went away.
Now, Gooshigan Ranch, of course, right today is a revived, wonderful oasis in the middle of the city, but that's their original Indian bungalow house.
That's right.
And gardens around it. But for them at the time, it was a little cabin away from the hurly-burly.
It was a retreat, and this was where they could come, and their arrival was quite amusing because they had to come down the lake in Mr. LeQuim's little boat, and part of the trip was in moonlight, and they stopped at the bay and unloaded and walked a little bit, and they came to a gate, and by this time Lord Aberdeen was a little bit pooped, and he was saying, "Gosh, I wish this was my gate." And Coote said, "Well, it is." And so they walked the rest of the way, about a quarter of a mile, and got to the house. But unbeknownst to them, the telegram they had sent to say they were coming had not arrived. So they were greeted with great suspicion, and nobody would let them in until Cootes made himself known, and the dogs were quieted, and the hatchets were put down, and the Chinese cook reassured. So
they were nearly put to flight by their own employees.
Absolutely. So that was quite an experience.
They seem very capable of that. So in 1891, as if life wasn't complicated enough, Lord Aberdeen is named Governor General of Canada.
Exactly, and this made a whole whale of a lot of difference to their whole attitude towards Canada. And when they came in to look at the house, they were just in time to judge the Fall Fair in Vernon, where Gooshigan had done tremendously in winning medals, etc. And they found out that in Vernon there was also a great desire for people to be able to take up land, but again it was still held in large blocks. And Lady Aberdeen had just sold her London house at that time, so she had $1 or $2 to sort of invest. Yeah. So she was persuaded to buy the Vernon Ranch.
Now the Coldstream Ranch was it was a ranch at that time, but they now purchased it.
That's right. And the report was from her agent, "You now possess the finest ranch in the Okanagan." And
of course, this was the big house too, because the house in Kelowna was a little cabin, a little house away from everything. Yeah. This was a much more splendid place.
It was. It was more substantial, and this was because I think it was closer to the railhead. The property there was larger, and because they knew that with the fruit industry, it's a long-term investment before you see anything coming out of it. And so the idea was to plant soft fruits between the rows of trees, like strawberries. And to that end, they built a jam factory so that they could process the fruit, because marketing it was another problem. Yeah. So they built the jam factory, and all the operations sort of moved to the to Coldstream. And it was Coldstream that experimented in the hops.
They actually decided to grow hops as well?
Indeed, they tried just about everything. And hops apparently had got good reviews from some agricultural guru who suggested it. And so they put in hops, And for some reason that I've never been too sure of, they contracted the Nez Perce Indians to come and do the harvesting. And every year they made this annual migration, which was a very colorful thing, and many people remember it, and remembered it for years. All the tribe coming down with horses and children and papooses, the whole lot, to pick the hops. And a fascinating piece of history.
That's right. Well, they would have, the Nez Perce Indians would have lived in what we call the boundary country, northern Washington state.
Right.
And they would come through over the Montashese or up the Okanagan to here?
Up the Okanagan and into the Cold Stream.
Now, how many years did they spend here? How much time actually did they live here? Because they got involved in all sorts of things.
Well, their life was not their own. The appointment, of course, was by the British government, and it was for a certain term of years. Sometimes it was renewed, sometimes it wasn't. I think their stint of actual duty was 4 years, but they'd had a year previous to that, so we can count on 5 years. And then later on, in about the 30s, in their later years, they made a return trip to see how the old place was getting along. By that time, it had passed out of their hands, but they still had an interest in it.
Now, we've got some other artifacts here. For example, a saddle. This is a lady's side saddle, and this is how Lady Aberdeen would have ridden. Now, she did a lot of riding.
Yes, well, it was the way you traveled at that time. And ladies, of course, if they were ladies, were side saddle. And she had two made, one that could sit one side and the other of the horse, so she could change sides each day.
How delicately put?
Well, it was because, you know, it's very hard on the back.
Yes.
And so if you could alternate it, it made life a little easier.
But she's not as genteel as some of these things, because what kind of activities would she be involved in when she was here relaxing? It'd be like anybody going camping in the wilderness.
Well, it was, and she got right into it. I mean, there's great reports of them going out hunting pheasants and bear hunts, and all this done on horseback and up in the wilds, and she was a good shot.
She took part in this stuff more than just sort of watching from the sidelines.
Oh, no, she wasn't a sidelines person. She got right into it.
All the while with the children and keeping track of them. This must have been paradise for them.
It was, because they were sort of unsupervised. They could be themselves. I mean, they weren't on show all the time. And of course, in Ottawa, when you're in an official position, you were constantly on show. Anyway, she felt that one of the best things that she could do was to try and provide an example of how successful fruit growing could be in the Okanagan. And this she did, and she encouraged other people who had background and money and could afford to wait out the produce time, and encouraged dozens and dozens of families to come out, take up land, and live in the Okanagan.
She almost sounds sort of like a modern sports figure, you know, shilling for running shoes, only hers was the Okanagan. Come to the Okanagan, make your fortune in the Okanagan.
Well, she actually, they had the brochure that they put together showing how much a return you could get from a 10-acre orchard. And that was quoted by all kinds of agriculturalists all over the place. And it was such a wonderful example. It was just like going to paradise, you know, and you put the seeds in the ground and jump back and wait for the results. But the idea of having 10 acres that could give you independence and sustenance was a wild dream that the people in Europe and Britain could never imagine. So coming out here to this country was
it
wonderful.
really caught on too, because look at this is an actual label from somebody's farm. This happened to be a farm in Lytton, but they're so taken with the fact that royalty is here, they call theirs Earl's Court British Columbia apples.
That's true, and there was other brands called Castle Brand, all given this aura of gentility, and you know, if it's good enough for royalty, it's good enough for her elder sons to go out and make a fortune, yeah.
And of course, if she's attracting people here, obviously news that the Commonwealth, this little Commonwealth country, has spectacular produce, obviously this news roars around the Commonwealth and people start buying our produce.
And the other thing is too, of course, some of the orchards that were planted then and shortly thereafter, those were the ones that produced the fantastic fruit that went to the Spokane Exposition in 1908, where they made a clean sweep of every prize.
Thanks
to the idea of commercial fruit growing being instilled by the Aberdeens.
Now, you are very strong on Lady Aberdeen's involvement in this. But of course, all the history books would write that Lord Aberdeen had overseen blah, 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 blah. But you feel very strongly this is Lady Aberdeen's initiative.
Well, you know, it's an extraordinary thing that you bring that up, because I have seen in the last little while several different volumes on Lady Aberdeen, Ishbel and the Empire, the Stormy Petrel of Government House. They all deal with Lady Aberdeen. She must have been a very unique and forceful character in her own right, because although I think he ruled the roost in the house, because there was no doubt at all about that, she had the imagination and the determination to make it go.
Well, let's take a break here and come back in just a second, because she is responsible for all sorts of other remarkable things, and we want to talk about those after this break. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Ursula Surtees, the curator of the Kelowna Museum, and we're talking about Lady Aberdeen. More evidence that she was a power and had some tremendous imagination about what was possible. This is Irish lace.
Yes, it is. And I have to say that this is almost a romance of Irish lace, because when they were Viceroy and the Viceregal pair in Ireland, there was a tremendous amount of poverty in Ireland at that time. But Lady Aberdeen had seen that there was some wonderful lace work going on in the way of crochet and the Irish limerick, and it was being taught in the convents by the nuns to the young girls. And she felt that here was a possible way of making some income for the village. So she set about an association to sort of pull this idea together. And they ended up by taking advantage of the fact that in 1893 there were going to be the Chicago's World Fair. And believe it or not, she managed to get an entire village set up. There were cottages with thatched roofs, with the women seated in there making the lace. It was a huge success, visited by thousands of people. And the upshot was that they sold something like 50,000 pounds of Irish lace.
That is 50,000 pounds sterling,
right,
worth about how many dollars do you
about
figure?
125,000 at that time. And when you figure how much the dollar was worth at that time,
Yes.
and all of this, 50% went to the Chicago World's Fair to pay for all whatever, and the other 50% went back to Ireland, where it was redistributed to all the poor families that had helped to create the lace. And it was so successful, they built a warehouse there in Chicago to warehouse the lace that was sent over. And for the next 5-6 years, they sold lace, and the income derived from that was sent back to Ireland. So she put money into so many poor pockets.
That was a huge idea, to transport the Irish to that location, and still there was a sort of a hands-off philosophy, because we're talking 1893 here.
That's right.
The classes didn't mix, but she made sure that work got done.
That's right.
The Victorian Order of Nurses is her idea.
Victorian Order of Nurses was an uphill idea, but the Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee was coming along, and they were looking for a particular thing to celebrate it. So Lady Aberdeen suggested that it would be timely to have an order of nurses that could go and visit rural women during childbirth, during epidemics. And although this sounds like a very sensible idea, it met with a terrific opposition from various other quarters that felt that this was perhaps not the thing to do, or it was in competition with the medical services. But basically, there were no medical services for an awful lot of the poorer women. And so she made sure that that indeed became the project that Canada involved itself in, and the Victoria Order of Nurses was formed as the official Diamond Jubilee celebration.
And this meant visits to hundreds of thousands of people who would have had no
That's right.
access to medical help previously.
Well, they kept track of the numbers, which were quite fantastic. And at least 50% of the numbers of people visited were people of no means, and so they got this as a free service. And not only that, but they also created a preventorium, if you want to call it that, where mothers and children could go for 2 weeks and just get away from the grind. And it was preventive medicine.
Now, where is the book that she helped to do? Because not all of her concerns and interests were serious. She had actually helped work on a children's book.
She did. It was called Wee Willie Winkie.
You've got it. Oh, there's
yes.
Wee Willie Winkie right
Wee
there.
Willie Winkie. She and her daughter, Marjorie Pentland, she became Marjorie Pentland later, but she was Lady Marjorie at that time. And this is a Canadian magazine for children. This is the bound volumes of 1 year. But this went out to children all across Canada, and the children were invited to participate in little competitions to write about their homes. And there's some really interesting pioneer thoughts in there from the children at that time. And again, this was to encourage children to read and to write and become interested in the world.
She had the ear of government, the ear of power, and she spoke into it loudly often.
Oh, she did. And I think that she wasn't a lady to be dissuaded too easily, because when the opposition for the Victorian Order of Nurses came along, she very quickly enlisted the services of the chief aide of Florence Nightingale. And Florence Nightingale at that time, her star was very high, and so who was going to argue with that lady? And so that brought the people on side very quickly.
That got the deal made quicker.
It did.
Although you can't point directly at her having an effect, but women's rights, of course, were very important. What organization did she start regarding women's rights?
She had the National Council of Women, which is worldwide now,
Yeah.
and she was the president of it for many years. She has received, or had received, rewards from, at least half a dozen countries that recognized what she had done to create a sistership, as you might say, of women who could band together to make progress in various areas, whether it be health or children, education, whatever.
Spectacular. And here she was, a vice-regal person, living in the Okanagan, enjoying it as a place away from the hurly-burly, and brought everybody to the Okanagan and did a whole lot for the world.
Oh,
That's
she did.
a wonderful story. Ursula, thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Ursula Surtees, curator of the Kelowna Museum, and the story today, Lady Aberdeen.